On a distant steppe, on a night when the wind drifted slowly through the tall grass, a child was born whose name no one yet knew. The sky was vast, the earth was hard, and life taught patience early to those who lived on this land. This child would one day command armies, cross long roads, yet would never sit upon a throne. His name was Subutai.
Subutai was not the son of Khans. He was not born in a noble tent. His father was a craftsman who shaped iron in fire. On the steppe, power did not come only from lineage. Endurance, attentiveness, and patience were worth as much as the sword. Years passed. The steppe changed, and on these lands, a name began to rise that would shape everyone's fate. That name was Genghis Khan. And beside him stood a commander who spoke little, listened much, and calculated every step. Subutai's story is not about the roar of battles, but about the long and silent journeys that lead to those battles. If you enjoyed our video, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can receive the reward for our efforts. Now, leaving the wind of the steppe behind us, let us continue with the story of Subutai.
Subutai's childhood and youth. According to historical sources, Subutai was born around the year 1175 within the borders of present-day Mongolia, in the region surrounding the Onon River. This area, in the late 12th century, was a land covered with vast steppes where frequent conflicts occurred among tribes. Winters were long and harsh. Summers were short but dry. Life was possible only for those who could adapt to nature.
Subutai's family did not belong to a family considered noble in Mongol society. His father was a craftsman who worked as a blacksmith. Among the Mongol tribes, blacksmiths were important. Weapons, horse-tack, and tools of war came from their hands. For this reason, Subutai grew up close to the instruments of war from a very young age.
The hours spent beside the fire taught him patience. He saw that iron only took shape at the right moment. At that time, children living on the Mongol steppes took on responsibility at an early age. Around the ages of 6 or 7, he learned to ride a horse. This was not a privilege in steppe life, but a necessity. In Mongol society, boys were introduced to hunting from a very young age. Subutai too gained experience, first with small animals, then with larger prey. Hunting was not done only to provide food, it developed attentiveness, patience, and a sense of direction. In the late 12th century, there was no central authority among the Mongol tribes. Each tribe was loyal to its own leader. This situation caused constant conflicts and migrations. Subutai's childhood passed in precisely this disordered environment. In the years when he stepped into youth, a new name on the steppe began to be heard slowly: Temujin. This leader, who would later take the name Genghis Khan, aimed to unite the tribes under a single order. Subutai was about 14 to 15 years old during this period. Temujin's rise began to change the balance on the steppe. For young men like Subutai, this situation meant new opportunities. Because Temujin was a leader who valued loyalty and ability more than lineage.
Subutai's youth was a time when he grew stronger physically and when his powers of observation developed. He became accustomed to traveling long distances. He learned how to find his way and to recognize mountain passes. On the Mongol steppes, there were no written maps. Knowledge was carried in memory. Subutai made a habit of keeping valleys, rivers, and mountain passes in his mind. This ability would later set him apart from other commanders. The young Subutai did not always take his place on the front lines of clashes. Instead, he observed his surroundings and measured movements. In Mongol warfare, timing was as important as discipline. Subutai realized at an early age that timing determined the fate of a battle. By the 1190s, Subutai was no longer just the son of a blacksmith, but a young man who knew the steppe well. And fate would soon draw him closer to Temujin's army. From this point on, Subutai's life would slowly shift from small skirmishes toward great campaigns. Meeting Genghis Khan and joining the army. By the late 12th century, the balance on the Mongol steppes had begun to change rapidly. The old order among the tribes was slowly unraveling. A new power was rising step by step. The name of this power was Temujin. Temujin, who would later be known as Genghis Khan, had gathered a loyal core force around him by the early 1990s.
At that time, Temujin was not yet the ruler of the entire steppe, but he was determined. Subutai, in those years, was around 18 to 20 years old. For young men like him, both staying on the steppe and joining a new rising power carried risks. Temujin's reputation spread not only through the battles he won, but also through the order he established. At his side, people who were not noble but were talented rose to prominence. This situation caught Subutai's attention. According to sources, Subutai first encountered Temujin's men during a small skirmish or assignment. This meeting did not take place as a grand ceremony. No drums were beaten, no crowds gathered. On the steppe, important things usually happened quietly.
When Subutai came to Temujin's camp, he immediately noticed the order there. The tents were not set up randomly. Guard duties were defined. Horses were kept in designated areas. This was an unusual level of discipline for the steppe. Temujin knew people by name. He knew what each person was capable of. Subutai did not stand out at the first meeting. He spoke little. He listened. This attitude caught Temujin's attention because Temujin knew that on the steppe, those who spoke too much usually thought too little.
Sources state that Subutai stood out thanks to his intelligence and powers of observation. Within a short time, he was given small tasks: scouting routes, advancing as a vanguard, observing the movements of the opposing side. These tasks were areas in which Subutai was strong. In Temujin's army, not everyone did every task. People were positioned according to their abilities.
Subutai quickly became known as a reliable person. As the early 1200s approached, Temujin's power continued to grow. During this process, Subutai was no longer an ordinary warrior. He was someone who planned the movements of small units, who thought ahead. In 1206, Temujin united the majority of the Mongol tribes.
In that year, Temujin was officially proclaimed Genghis Khan. At that time, Subutai was not yet a high-ranking commander, but he was within the core leadership group. In the Mongol army, ranks were granted not by bloodline, but by achievement. Subutai's rise began within this very system. The tasks assigned to him gradually became more complex. Long-range reconnaissance, assessing the condition of different tribes, reporting potential conflicts in advance. Subutai became accustomed to operating alone in these missions. Silence had now become an advantage for him. Genghis Khan did not praise Subutai out loud, but he entrusted him with the most difficult tasks. On the steppe, this was a sign of trust. Subutai's joining the army changed his life, but at the same time, it also shaped the future of the Mongol army, because this quiet young man would one day devise plans that would determine the fate of armies. For now, Subutai was simply a careful warrior who carried out his duties, but the steppe had already begun to whisper his name. First campaigns and the rise of Subutai. After Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes in 1206, a new era began on the steppe. Conflicts were no longer small tribal skirmishes, but were turning into more planned campaigns. In this new order, the army stood not only on strength, but on organization. Subutai, during these years, was still young by age, but the tasks he was given carried responsibilities greater than his years. Genghis Khan placed great importance on reconnaissance in order to see what lay ahead of the army. It was at this point that Subutai stood out. In his first campaigns, he was usually given vanguard duties, advancing ahead of the units, examining the terrain, tracking the enemy's traces. These tasks did not require quick decisions, but correct ones. Subutai did not rush. He measured the roads, studied river crossings, and kept possible routes of retreat in mind. In the Mongol army, many warriors were brave, but Subutai combined his courage with silence. In 1207 and 1208, the Mongol army launched campaigns against the tribes to the north and west. In these campaigns, the goal was not only to fight, it was to bring under control those who did not accept the new order. In these expeditions, Subutai could sense in advance where the enemy would resist, because he studied human behavior as carefully as he studied the terrain. During this period, Subutai's path crossed with another important commander. His name was Jebe. Jebe was a fast and daring warrior. Subutai, on the other hand, was calm and calculating. The two were complementary characters, each completing the other. Genghis Khan recognized this harmony. Over time, Subutai and Jebe began to be assigned together on the same campaigns. This was an important turning point for Subutai, because he was no longer just someone carrying out orders, but a part of the plans. By the year 1211, the Mongol army turned toward a much greater target. That target was the Jin dynasty. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China and possessed strong fortifications. For the Mongols, this meant a form of warfare they were not accustomed to. Here as well, Subutai took on important responsibilities. He argued that cities should not be taken by direct assault, but through siege and pressure. Mongol sources note that during this period, Subutai focused on supply lines. In other words, War was won not only at the front, but also behind it. Subutai's plans took time, but they produced results. This did not escape Genghis Khan's attention. Subutai was not rewarded loudly, but he was given broader authority. In the Mongol army, this was a promotion.
As the years passed, Subutai was now responsible not for small units, but for the movement of larger forces. By 1216, Subutai and Jebe were assigned to a long campaign toward the west. This mission was not an ordinary attack. The aim was to understand the enemy, learn the routes, and return. This campaign marked the beginning of the process that would write Subutai's name into history. Because now he was not just a commander, but a strategist who thought about distant lands. But this story had not yet truly begun. For now, Subutai advanced quietly, keeping in his mind the roads that led away from the steppe. Subutai and Jebe's Western Campaign, the Caucasus, Rus lands, and the Kalka River. After 1216, a new mission was defined for the Mongol army. This mission was not so much conquest as it was reconnaissance. Genghis Khan wanted to know what lay in the west, which peoples lived there, which routes could be crossed, and how different armies fought. The two men chosen for this task were Jebe and Subutai. This choice was no coincidence. Jebe was a fast and daring commander. Subutai, on the other hand, was someone who thought long-term and planned carefully. The two commanders set out with a force of approximately 20,000 men. This number was not a large army, but the goal was not to fight, it was to learn. As the Mongol force advanced toward the Caucasus Mountains, the geography began to change. The steppe gave way to narrow passes, forests, and mountain roads. This was an unfamiliar environment for the Mongols. Subutai acted cautiously here. The advance was slowed. Reconnaissance units were expanded, because in narrow terrain, being fast did not always provide an advantage. By the year 1220, the Mongol forces encountered the Alans and Kipchak communities in the Caucasus. These peoples were accustomed to mountain warfare. Subutai used a method of division rather than direct assault. First, alliances were promised. Then those alliances were deliberately broken. The tribes were separated from one another. This method reflected the core of Subutai's understanding of warfare. Before defeating the enemy, leave him alone. This strategy made it possible to cross the Caucasus passes. The Mongol forces then turned north. In this region there were the Rus principalities. The Rus lands were not united. Each principality protected its own interests. Subutai recognized this situation. Information was gathered. Messages were monitored. Which prince was at odds with which other, and which city would not come to another's aid. In 1223, the Mongol army faced the combined forces of the Rus and the Kipchaks near the Kalka River. This battle became one of the moments that wrote Subutai's name into history. The Rus army was superior in numbers, but it was disorganized. Subutai applied the classic Mongol tactic, the feigned retreat. Mongol units deliberately withdrew. This movement, which lasted for days, exhausted the Rus army. Their formation broke down. When the right moment came, the Mongol units launched a sudden counterattack that shattered the front. The Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 ended with a decisive Mongol victory. After this victory,
Subutai could not stop, because his mission was not to take territory, but to gather information. The Mongol forces began their return after the victory, but even the return journey was a reconnaissance mission. Subutai kept rivers, forests, and city routes in his mind. This information would be used years later during the European campaigns. By 1224, Subutai and Jebe returned to Genghis Khan. They brought back not gold or loot, but knowledge. And this knowledge was the most valuable thing for an empire. Genghis Khan now saw Subutai not just as a commander, but as a strategist. Subutai remained silent. He was not chasing fame, but in the Mongol army, everyone now knew his name. And on the steppe, Subutai's name was whispered more often, because he did not just win battles, he also planned the future.
Subutai's European campaign, Poland, Hungary, and the Battle of Mohi. By 1236, the Mongol army had passed through Russia and began moving further west. This campaign aimed to go beyond the Siberian and Kipchak steppes. Subutai was no longer just a vanguard, but the coordinator of large forces. The goal of this campaign was not to seize new lands, but to measure the strength of European armies. At the core of Mongol strategy were speed and intelligence. Subutai knew this very well. The first stop was the territory of present-day Poland. The Polish army consisted of tribal and city units. Sometimes a prince, sometimes another region acted independently. Subutai scouted the roads with his vanguard units. He gathered information from surrounding villages. The Mongols' military speed and tactics to confuse the enemy were unexpected for the Poles.
In 1241, Subutai and his forces entered Hungary. The Hungarian lands were a new terrain for the Mongols. There were plains, but also rivers and forested areas. Subutai analyzed this unfamiliar geography. He calculated the mobility of the armies and the advantages on the battlefield. The Hungarian forces were united and ready, but the Mongols' plans were unexpected. Subutai maneuvered the army units using feigned retreats. This tactic gradually lured the enemy into a trap. Finally, the Battle of Mohi took place. In the summer of 1241, the Mongol army faced the Hungarian forces near the Tisa River. The Hungarian army, superior in numbers, was scattered due to irregular units and divided command. Here, Subutai demonstrated his strategic genius. First, he controlled the bridges and river crossings. He cut off communication within the Hungarian army. Then, he divided the army units into small groups. These groups appeared to attack from different directions individually. In reality, all of it was prearranged. The Mongols were clever and disciplined. On the battlefield, every move was calculated. The Hungarian army was thrown into panic and scattered.
Subutai's tactics not only defeated the enemy, but also succeeded in maintaining order within the army. This victory was a turning point in the Mongol-European campaign. During this process, Subutai, together with other commanders, further strengthened army discipline. After the battle, the remaining units were gathered. Loot and prisoners were counted. What Subutai focused on was clearing the battlefield and gathering information. Which routes were safe, which cities might resist, and which peoples could form alliances. This information was vital for Genghis Khan for future campaigns. After the Mongol forces passed through Hungarian lands, they withdrew with proper strategy and swift movements. Subutai recorded every step. There were no maps, but in his mind, every bridge, river, and hill was in its place. The European campaign was one of the moments when Subutai demonstrated his genius in strategy and planning to the world. This campaign was not just a military victory. Subutai clearly applied for the first time that army management, reconnaissance, and intelligence were fundamental elements of warfare. From now on, resisting him was almost impossible. Subutai's name was whispered not only on the Mongol steppe, but also across Eastern Europe. And Subutai, with his silence and strategic brilliance, truly began to become legendary.
Subutai's strategic victories after the Western campaign. Establishing order in Russia and Central Europe. By the end of the summer of 1241, Subutai and the Mongol army had completed the European campaign. The conflicts in Poland and Hungary were not merely victories for the Mongols. What mattered most to Subutai was establishing a previously unseen order. The Mongol army had learned to assert control over the battlefield after every victory. This became even more systematic under Subutai's leadership. As Subutai withdrew with the army, he secured the routes, established supply points, and monitored enemy communities. According to Mongol sources, during this period, Subutai maintained order by leaving small garrisons in the northern and eastern regions of Rus and Polish territories. These garrisons were not only armed forces, they also took on the tasks of territorial control and intelligence gathering. Subutai calculated the location of each garrison, the transportation routes, and the likely reactions of nearby villages. This was a display of strategic brilliance beyond the battlefield. By 1242, the Mongol army began to return, but Subutai's work was not finished. Establishing order in Eastern Europe could not be achieved by war alone. Subutai held meetings with the local leaders in the region. He enforced submission with some and made agreements with others. But in every case, the objective was clear: to establish Mongol order and control the flow of information. During this process, Subutai also strengthened discipline within the army. Units acting without coordination would have meant disaster in battle. Subutai's sense of order prevented this. Around 1243, the Mongol army began inspecting the fortresses in Rus territories. In each fortress, there was military and logistical oversight. The remaining areas were organized according to Subutai's plan. During this period, Subutai secured the routes with his small but effective units. Thanks to this, Genghis Khan and other Mongol leaders were able to embark on more distant campaigns. Even when Subutai was far from the battlefield, he continued to achieve strategic victories. Establishing order in Central Europe required a genius beyond mere warfare. Subutai accomplished this. According to sources, Subutai's tactical and planning abilities during this period clearly set him apart from other Mongol commanders. The movements of small units, Intelligence on the field and logistical lines were all under Subutai's control. This period ensured that Subutai's reputation spread all the way to Europe. Subutai appeared quiet and calm, but every step he took was part of a plan for the army and the campaigns. These strategic victories cemented his position within the Mongol army. By 1245, Subutai was no longer just a commander with skill in battle. He was a leader who understood every aspect of warfare.
The army's speed, its secrecy, ability to surprise the enemy, reconnaissance, and intelligence, all were under his command. When Subutai returned from Europe to the wide plains of the steppe, he held a distinct respect within the army. Genghis Khan and the other leaders were well aware of his strategic brilliance. Subutai was silent, yet his influence was immense. On the steppe, his name began to become legendary among both the army and the people. And Subutai, throughout his life, would maintain this discipline and strategic approach. The European campaigns had proven that he was not only a genius within Mongol lands, but an international mastermind. Subutai's final great campaigns and northwest expansion. Around 1245, Subutai was already an experienced commander. He had returned from the European campaigns, and his reputation within the army was unshakable. But there was no rest for him. Genghis Khan's legacy and the needs of the Mongol Empire guided Subutai toward new campaigns. The objective of this campaign was to secure Mongol dominance across Northwest Asia and the Caucasus. Subutai served as the vanguard of the army. But he was no longer just a vanguard, he was a strategic planner. The Mongol forces traversed mountain passes, river valleys, and steppe routes under Subutai's guidance. By 1246, the army's northern advance had reached the territories of present-day Iran, Azerbaijan, and the Caucasus.
These regions were under the control of the Seljuks and local tribes. Although the enemy was superior in numbers, they were scattered and lacked coordination. Subutai once again demonstrated his military genius. He sent fast-moving small units from multiple directions to surprise the enemy. Strategic points were captured. Fortresses and bridges were secured to ensure safe passage. Subutai planned every step in advance. He kept the soldiers' morale high and secured the logistical lines. Around 1247, Subutai's army reached northeastern Iran and southern Russia. During this period, Subutai conducted reconnaissance with small units, observed enemy lines, and tracked any fleeing forces. Mongol sources note that during this time, Subutai surpassed all other commanders in military intelligence and discipline. The army's rapid and effective movements impressed both the enemy and the local populations. Every move planned by Subutai was critical for the army and the empire. By 1248, Subutai descended from the Caucasus and developed new strategies aimed at Central Europe. These strategies were effective not only on the battlefield, but also in logistics and intelligence gathering. Subutai gained strategic superiority by moving his units from unexpected directions against the enemy. This process was recorded as a major success for the Mongol Empire. Although Subutai appeared quiet and calm, he had become the main authority over discipline and order within the army. During the northwest expansion, Subutai's tactics served as lessons for the next generation of commanders. These campaigns, stretching from the steppe to Europe, enshrined Subutai in history not just as a warrior, but as a true strategic genius. By 1249, Subutai, with the experience of many years, was managing the army and the campaigns. Strategic victories, discipline within the army, and logistical organization all occurred thanks to his foresight. Subutai was always silent, but this silence was a power recognized by both the army and the enemy. The northwest expansion was one of the most critical periods in which the Mongol Empire strengthened its influence in Europe and Asia. And Subutai, during this time, cemented his contribution to the army through strategic intelligence and discipline.
Subutai's main strategies and genius in warfare: speed, feigned retreats, and multi-directional attacks. Subutai's genius lay not only in his courage, but in his strategic intelligence. The Mongol army did not usually operate in very large numbers, but Subutai knew how to use even small units to create a great impact. One of his fundamental strategies was speed. The rapid movement of armies provided an advantage on the battlefield. But speed was not merely running. Every movement had to be pre-calculated and coordinated. Subutai sent small reconnaissance units ahead to quietly learn the enemy's positions. This information would determine the movement of the main force. His second fundamental strategy was the feigned retreat. This tactic was used to lure the enemy into a trap. Sometimes units would appear to be withdrawing from the battlefield, and the enemy would follow them. Then, with prepared traps and multi-directional attacks, the enemy would be scattered. This method was effectively employed during the Kalka River and Hungarian campaigns. Subutai not only controlled the enemy, but also maintained the morale and order of his own army. His third important strategy was multi-directional attacks. Simultaneous assaults from different directions confused the enemy, disrupted communication and coordination, and paved the way for victory. This tactic was used in the campaigns in Asia, such as the Kipchak and Iranian expeditions, and similarly in Europe, in Poland and Hungary. Subutai's approach to warfare was always based on reading the enemy and turning conditions to his advantage. In an Asian campaign, to cross a mountainous region, Subutai first scouted the paths with small units. To surprise the enemy, he conducted night raids and feigned retreats. This allowed the larger main forces to cross the mountains without losses. In Europe, at the Battle of Mohi and the Battle of the Kalka River, Subutai applied the same principles. He dispersed and controlled numerically superior enemy armies through small units and tactical withdrawals. Subutai's genius was evident not only in battle tactics, but also in strategic planning and logistics. Before each campaign, he calculated in advance where to procure food and horses, which routes were safe, and from which villages and towns information could be obtained, giving the army a decisive advantage. His strategic intelligence shaped both the army and the future of warfare. Subutai always remained calm on the battlefield. For him, careful calculation rather than haste was the guarantee of victory. These tactics of Subutai enabled the Mongol army to achieve great successes in both Asia and Europe in a short time. And Subutai, with his silent and careful demeanor, became legendary,
both within the army and in the eyes of the enemy. Subutai's leadership and strategic approach, garrison and logistics organization, intelligence gathering and reporting. Subutai's genius was evident not only on the battlefield, but also in the post-battle period. Winning a battle was easy, but maintaining that victory, establishing order over the army and the conquered territories, required a completely different kind of intelligence. At this point, Subutai's greatest talent was his ability to plan and manage. When a battle ended, Subutai did not merely gather his troops, he established order over the army and the land. The first step was the placement of garrisons. Critical passes, rivers, and roads were secured by carefully selected small units. Garrisons were not just soldiers, they were observation posts providing intelligence and information to the army. Subutai planned in advance the location, duties, and communication of each garrison. Which villages or towns could be hostile or allied, which routes were safe, which areas were risky, everything was calculated. The second step was logistics management. The Mongol army moved quickly, but rapid movement required a steady supply of food, water, and horses. Subutai secured all logistical lines before and after battle. Supply routes were established and backup supply points were organized. In this way, the army did not just win victories, it remained ready and secure for the next campaign. The third step was intelligence gathering and analyzing the enemy's psychology. Subutai read not only his army, but also his enemy. Small reconnaissance units observed enemy villages, roads, and forces. Subutai evaluated this information and adjusted his battle plans accordingly. Furthermore, by monitoring enemy reactions and morale, he could predict in advance which tactics would work. After each campaign, Subutai compiled all collected information into detailed reports and presented them to Genghis Khan. These reports included not only battlefield outcomes, but also the number of enemy forces, their mobility, morale, and strategic positions. This approach increased Subutai's prestige as a planner and coordinator within the army. He demonstrated that victory was not won by the sword alone, but when combined with strategy, intelligence, and logistics, success could be guaranteed. This approach influenced the entire Mongol army, from the Kipchak and Iranian campaigns in Asia to the campaigns in Poland and Hungary in Europe. Although Subutai appeared quiet and calm, he was always at the center of planning and organization. His method provided the army with confidence and stability, and this confidence allowed the Mongols to advance rapidly and effectively in subsequent major campaigns. Subutai's leadership was a model that shaped not only battlefield outcomes, but also the future of the army and the empire. For this reason, Subutai went down in history not just as a commander, but as a genius who thought, planned, and developed strategy.
Subutai's final years, death, and legacy. Subutai was now in his advanced years. The harsh winds of the steppe and the fatigue of long campaigns were visible on the lines of his face. Yet his intelligence had never faded. Subutai remained the army's most valuable strategist. No longer on the front lines of battles, he served as an advisor and planner. He trained new commanders and passed on his knowledge of strategy and tactics. Subutai's experience was combined with the calmness and wisdom that only years can bring. All units in the army acted according to his guidance. During these years, Subutai especially strengthened logistics and intelligence systems. The army's needs for food, water, and horses were secured along pre-planned routes. Once again,
Subutai demonstrated that wars were won not only by the sword, but also through knowledge and careful planning. At the same time, he developed new tactics to maintain the army's morale. Movements became faster and more coordinated, designed to disrupt enemy plans. Subutai's legacy continued to shape the Mongol army even in his final years. In every campaign, commanders who consulted him applied his strategies and achieved victory. Historians note that even after Subutai's death, his influence on the army and the empire endured. Subutai aged quietly and simply, yet his impact continued to live on in the battlefields and strategic plans. His methods, siege tactics, feigned retreats, multi-directional attacks, garrison and logistics planning were studied by military geniuses for centuries. According to historical records, Subutai passed away in the mid-13th century as an old and wise commander. Although his death was a loss for the Mongol army, the order and strategic insight he left behind continued to inspire new generations of commanders. Subutai's legacy was measured not only by victories. Beyond war, through planning, discipline, and strategy, he contributed to shaping an empire. Thus, Subutai's name was engraved in history not only in the Mongol steppe, but across Asia and Europe as a strategic genius. His silence provided discipline within the army, his intelligence shone on the battlefield, and his foresight in strategic planning served as an example for generations to come.
Subutai's legacy and historical impact. Military and strategic legacy in Europe and Asia. Subutai's life had ended, but his influence continued to live on. The victories he achieved on the battlefield, the order and discipline he instilled in the army, served as a guide for future generations. In Europe, the tactics he employed in Poland and Hungary were studied by military historians for centuries. Feigned retreats, multi-directional attacks, and rapid maneuvers by small units became foundational elements of warfare strategy in these regions. In Asia, his strategic victories in the Kipchak, Iranian, and Russian territories served as examples of army discipline and logistical planning. Subutai's methods were not only applied to win battles, but also to ensure the stability of the army and the empire. Historians regard Subutai not merely as a warrior, but as one of the greatest strategic geniuses in history. His ability to plan, read the enemy, and coordinate within the army set him apart clearly from other Mongol commanders. When compared with modern military tactics, Subutai's strategies remain remarkably relevant. Rapid maneuvers, intelligence gathering, deceiving the enemy, and multi-directional attacks are still cited as examples in some contemporary military training programs.
Subutai, with the methods he used to maintain discipline and organize units within the army, seems to have laid the foundations of modern logistics and intelligence practices. His legacy is not only about victories, but also serves as a guide on how a commander should think. It demonstrates that wars are not won merely by strength and numbers, but through strategy, planning, and psychological superiority. Subutai's name continues to be whispered through every page of military history, from Asia to Europe. Even today, in military academies and history books, Subutai's methods and intellect continue to inspire new generations of commanders. With his silence, calm demeanor, and strategic brilliance, Subutai left an unforgettable mark as one of history's most effective commanders. Subutai's tomb and posthumous status. When Subutai's life came to an end, it was the year 1248. He had retired from the battlefields and returned to his home on the edge of the steppe.
Once a powerful commander who traversed the roads from Asia to Europe, he now spent quiet days by the banks of the Toul River. According to historical sources, Subutai spent his final years providing counsel to the army, planning strategies, and developing superior tactics. His intelligence and accumulated experience left a lasting legacy for the future commanders of the Mongol army. Subutai is believed to have died on a cold day in 1248. Sources mention that he passed away at his home near the Toul River. However, the exact location of his tomb is not recorded in historical documents. This situation is similar to that of Genghis Khan. Great commanders do not have graves marked on maps, because they live not only in the lands they conquered, but in the flow of history itself.
In Mongol tradition, it was common for the tombs of great commanders to be kept secret or simply forgotten. Sometimes, tombs were deliberately left ambiguous to prevent enemies from desecrating them. Thus, a strategic genius like Subutai was respected not only during his life, but also after his death. Today, in Mongolia, historical research cannot provide precise information about the tombs of great commanders like Subutai. Some experts believe his grave may be on a hidden slope in the steppe near the Toul River, while others suggest he may have been buried in a simple ceremony according to his wishes. No tomb has been definitively documented. This is part of Subutai's historical legacy. He became a remembered strategic genius not only of armies and battles, but also in the depths of history itself. The location of Subutai's tomb may be unknown, but his plans, battlefield genius, the order he established within the army, and his strategic insight will continue to live on in the pages of world history.